Hello everyone, in this lesson we are going to talk about CSS Syntax and Selectors. In our previous lessons, we learned that CSS is very important for those web developers because when we create web pages without using CSS, parang skeleton lang siya. Okay? But when we use CSS in our web pages, para siyang tao na may magarbo at magandang damit. Okay? Yung skeleton nagkaroon ng laman at may magandang damit. So, ganun yung kalalabasan. Going back to this lesson, at the end of this lesson, you will be able to determine or explain CSS syntax and of course use selectors. Okay, so as we go on with our discussion, I will be presenting to you some examples. In our previous example, we had this sample CSS HTML. As you can see, we have the basic HTML structure here, starting the doc type HTML, and then the HTML. Then inside it, we have the body, head I should say, and then body. Napapansin nyo magkapantay sila. So, parang tao nga lang, sabi ko na, merong ulo, merong katawan. Okay? And inside this head, nilagyan natin ng title. And this title is being displayed in our browser tab. And in here, we can add stanchions. Okay? Using style element, and then its type is text or CSS. First, we are going to talk about CSS syntax. Gaya ng ibang programming languages, meron tayong sinusunod na syntax in creating CSS or cascading style sheet. Meron din tayong sinusunodang syntax. A rule set of CSS consists of what we call selector and a declaration block. So example, palitan natin ito. We have h1 for heading one element, and then inside that is meron tayong properties. Bawa for the color of our text, say gawin natin blue. Then, say we have a font size, and then 12px, and then semicolon. In this example of CSS inside our style element is what we call internal CSS. If sinabing internal CSS, that style sheet is being added inside our head tag. As you can see, in our syntax, meron siyang iba't ibang part. Okay? So, etong h1 dito, we call this one as selector because it is used to select the element which is h1, the name of the element itself, para malagyan ng style, yung h1. Ang tawag dito naman inside our curly braces is declaration block. Okay? And pag sinabi namang declaration, this one. Okay? You have the color, colon, blue, semicolon. This one is one declaration. And then font size 12px is another declaration. A declaration consists of a property. So our first declaration is color blue. This color here is a property. At yung blue naman is the value. Blue, white, red, etc. We also have here a font size property, and yung value niya is 12px. What if we want to include more declarations? Okay, as you can see, i-separate lang natin sila ng semicolon. Yung iba, ang ginagawa, we can do it in one line only. Okay? Pwedeng ganito siya. Yan. So, isang linya lang. Pwede rin ganyan. Pero, ang ginagawa ko is yung nauna because parang mas maganda tingnan. Okay? Parang mas maayos siya. Kasi, for example, we add another declaration. Let's say text align, colon, center. Yan. Ibig sabihin, this selector here, na kung saan sineselect nyo yung H1 element, will be styled using these properties and values. Maglagay tayo ng another element wherein we are going to style a paragraph. Say P, element selector. Okay? P. Gamitin natin yung ibang color. Say, gawin natin red, yung kulay ng text ng P. Then, text align, center, semicolon. And of course, we need to end it with close brace. Mag-tab tayo para makita natin na these declarations here are inside this selector. Okay? So, in here, color is another property. Its value is red. The text align is a property. And center is the value. Okay? So, this one is one declaration block. Now, let's see first the different categories. We can also select elements using different categories. Meron tayong tinatawag na combinator selectors. These selectors select elements based on a specific relationship between them. Meron din tayong tinatawag na pseudo-class selectors. So, these selectors select elements based on a certain state. For example, I'm gonna click a button. While clicking it, mag-iiba yung kulay niya. Meron din tayong tinatawag na pseudo-element selector. Select and style a part of an element. Yung parte lang, halimbawa, I have a div element. On the left side of that element, kailangan kong kulay na red. Okay, and the other side is blue. So, some parts of that element only be given a style or applied a style using pseudo element selector. And then we have also the attribute selectors, wherein these selectors select elements based on an attribute or the attribute value. Kasi in an HTML element, it consists of different attributes. Diba? By this time, we are going to learn these three basic selectors. Unang-una, yung example natin kanina, which is using the element name itself. Okay? H1P, for example, sana inside our body we have a div. Okay? Pwede natin palitan yung color nito or any other property. Gusto natin palitan ng division element. Also, we will be learning yung ID selector, wherein an ID is an attribute of particular HTML element. Based from the ID of that element, ibigyan natin ng style. And then, we also have the class selector. Unahin natin yung ID selector. Inside our body, meron tayong paragraph. We include two paragraphs. Say P, then hello world na naman. Then, tingnan natin. The other one, so, yung style ilalagay natin dito sa first paragraph element. And this next paragraph will not be affected. Okay? So, lagyan na lang natin. This paragraph is not affected by the style. Okay. Now in here, using ID, okay, we need to include ID attribute here, equals, and then its value, the ID name, let's say para1. Using this para1 ID here, we style this paragraph using para1. Okay, so inside our style here, palitan natin ito, palitan na natin. We have when we create a selector for ID selector, it must be started with hash character. Okay, hash and then para1. After that, close with curly braces. Let's say yung text align niya gawin natin center. Then, yung kanyang color, align at color na naman. Oh, this must be semicolon. Okay, now, to test this, we will need to save it first. Okay, so we go to file, hindi na natin alam kung saan sinave ito, kaya i-save as natin. Let's just wait a second. Ayun. So, we go to desktop. Dito na lang tayo. Then, I have here a folder for HTML file. CSS Selector. Take note, to test our HTML page, we need to have an extension name of HTML. Okay? Kasi pag text lang yan or txt, ang mangyayari ay i-read ni browser as text. Okay? Pero pag HTML, it will read as a web page. Okay? It's either HTML or HTM. Then we save it. We go to the folder where we save our HTML page. So we go to desktop, then first HTML file, and in here. So mapapansin nyo, in this example, meron akong HTML text dito. So it is as text, no? Pero ito, automatically makikita nyo, pwede natin i-open sa browser. Yan. So open with natin. Gamit tayo ng add any type of browser, Firefox, Google Chrome, Explorer, Microsoft Edge, Opera, etc. Okay? So, let's say Google Chrome tayo. Let's wait a minute. Okay. Here is our output. As you can see, may mali. Yung color natin. So, the value of our color should be red. Then, save natin ulit. We go back to our browser and then reload it. So, mapapansin nyo, in our code, our paragraph is this one, hello world. So, eto yun, yung first paragraph natin. Then, since it has a para ID wherein it is used as a selector in our style element, kita nyo, yung text align as center and yung color as red, it is being applied in our first paragraph. But in our second paragraph, since we did not apply an ID here, which is para 1, hindi na-apply yung ating text align sa color. Okay? So that is on how to use an ID selector. Yan. Now, paano naman kapag gumamit tayo ng class selector? Okay? Kaya nang sabi ko kanina, ID is an attribute for HTML elements. For example, itong paragraph. So, a class is also an attribute of HTML elements. So, how can we use it? Okay, so let's take this example. Let's say we use center. Okay, center. Ang tawag ito? Center class. Okay, so suppose talin natin ito. In our body, suppose meron tayong H1 or heading 1. A paragraph element. Now, lagyan natin ng ano dito. Laman yung ating heading 1. Sabihin natin dito, center aligned heading. Or red and heading. Then this one, sabihin natin this is a red and center aligned paragraph. Yan. Okay. And we apply here a class attribute, or we include, I should say, equals center. Yan. So, dito, with the use of class attribute, pag gumamit tayo ng class as selector, we need to start it with dot. Okay? Take note, pag ID, we need to precede the ID name at with hashtag. Okay? Pero pag class naman, class selector, we need to start it with period. So, the name of our class is center. Then, enclose natin with curly braces. Let's say, ganun. Copy na natin ito. So, again, magiging center yung align niya. Magiging red yung color niya. So, we save this one. We open again our browser. Boom. Okay. Bakit malalaki? Okay. Kasi, this one is a heading one. Okay. Pag ginawa natin H2, for example, heading 2, liliit yan. Pero, malaki pa rin. Kasi heading. Balik natin. Papansin nyo, these styles, okay, are only applied in H1. What if lagyan din natin ng the same class? Okay. So, mangyayari, save natin. Then, reload natin ulit ito. Output. It will also be applied in our paragraph. Yan. So, That is the use of class selector. Okay? Now, in class attribute in our HTML, pwede rin tayong maglagay ng more than 2. Okay? Halimbawa, center, tapos large, and then for that large ay nagawa ulit tayo ng another style. Pwede lang siya. Pero using ID, you can only include one ID for a particular element. For example, itong H1. Pag may ID ka dyan, equals. Yan. Halimbawa, ID para 1. Let's say, text. Palitan natin. Text decoration. Yun natin underline. So, ano mangyayari? May ID na, may plus pa. Tingnan natin ano mangyayari. Ito yung output natin. Ayun. So, ibig sabihin, in an element, we can use more than one selector pala. No? So, ID, which is para 1, plus, which is center. Ito yung center, ito yung para 1. Lahat ng styles na nasa loob nitong dalawang selectors are being applied in our H1. But take note, para hindi masyadong marami ito, kung the same element lang din naman ang lalagyan mo ng style, it's better if we only use one selector. Okay? It's better if we only use one selector. If we are using ID, ID lang. If plus, plus na lang. Okay? But later on, when you use plus, you can include more than 2 or 3 or multiple class attributes. Okay? Yes, class attribute value. Yan. So let's say itong large class. So that large kasi class. Inside this, for example, gawin natin yung size niya is malaki since large. No? Size 50px. Malaki na ba yan? Then, check our output, load, ayan. So, papansin nyo, ayan. In our paragraph, na-apply yung ating styles in our center selector, and then yung style sa ating large selector. Okay? Later on, we can use also these selectors in other elements. Also, just like our ID selector, this class element or class name cannot also be started with a number. So, dapat letter or underscore. Okay? So, that's the difference between CSS, ID, and class selector. Now, meron din tayong tinatawag na universal selector. If you happen to learn about SQL na, meron tayong all, which is yung asterisk, diba? So, in CSS, we call it as universal selector. So, how do we use that? Example, using a star or asterisk, no? And then, ganyan. So, lahat ng stars na nandito sa loob niya ay ma-apply sa lahat ng elements na nandito sa ating HTML. For example, inside our body, meron tayong P at saka class, diba? So, ma-apply lahat yan. Bawa, lahat ng ito. Yan. Gawin natin dyan. Ano pa ba? Yan. Underline. Okay. Tanggalin natin na itong lahat. Kasi universal nga. Root all. Ma-apply dito lahat. Okay. So, save it. Then, dito tayo. Mapapansin nyo na-apply lahat. Text decoration, yung font size niya, yung align, yung color, etc. Yung ating decoration. Yan. So, this is our universal selector. Galing natin ito. But if we are going to group our selectors, let's say, dagdagan natin yung element natin dito. H1, dagdagan natin ng H2, yan. Smaller heading, heading, sample lang ito. Then, this is a paragraph. Yan. Ngayon, ito, lahat ng ito, yung H1, H2, P, we combine them. Okay? Or we group them. Okay? Diba, instead yung ilagay natin dyan is H1 plus another H2, okay, then another, we have P, kasi nga using element name yung ating selector, P, H2, H1. Okay, so using this, the same lang din naman. So instead na isa-isahin mo yan, magiging lengthy pa yung code mo, pag sama-samahin mo na sila. You group them. Okay, so H1, comma, H2, comma, P. Okay, so using comma, you separate them with comma para i-group sila. Sabihin, lahat ng nasa loob nitong style will be applied in all these elements. Kasi lahat ng elements na to are being used as selectors. Okay? So, yan. That is how to group selectors in CSS. If we are going to list all the simple selectors, eto sila. And the class, yan. Example nyo, intro, makikita nyo, preceded by, ito nga. Ibig sabihin, ito i-select nyo lahat ng elements with intro class. Yung ID. So, hash first name, lahat ng element with ID first name i-select na yun. And then, yung asterisk, it selects all the elements. And then, the element class or element selector, yan. CP, select all the elements. And then, yung group, group selectors, DP, it selects the deep elements and all P elements. Yan. So those are the basic or simple selectors in CSS. After watching this lecture, you are going to play a game wherein you will be selecting different elements using different selectors. Okay? So, it consists of 30 problems yata yun, I think, or 30 plus. It will serve as your first quiz in this subject. So, that's all for this lesson. That's all about CSS Syntax and Selectors. See you in our next lecture. So, bye.